2:34 in the morning, October 16, 1946. Nuremberg. 13 wooden steps. Each one creaks under the weight of a polished boot. Alfred Jodl climbs without a tremor. His back remains straight. His gaze stays fixed. No begging, no blinking. The military posture is an engineering setting, not a choice. 13 steps to the platform. Jodl spent every day of the war beside Adolf Hitler. He was the filter. He took the chaos of the Führer's mind and converted it into maps, logistics, and steel. He signed the orders. Thousands of Allied prisoners died because of his pen. The United States Army kept the details of this gymnasium hidden for decades. They scrubbed the record. They buried the protocol. Because the physics of the execution failed the math of the sentence. The trapdoor mechanism waited. The rope was ready. The discipline that kept his spine straight on the gallows was forged 30 years earlier. It did not begin with a crime. It began with a mold. Würzburg, May 10, 1890. In the late 19th century, this Bavarian region offered one path for men of his class. The military was the only social lift. In the Jodl household, the army was not a career, it was a religion. His father served, his uncles served. What turns a soldier into a criminal? In 1914, the only answer was loyalty. He grew up surrounded by the scent of gun oil and heavy wool. The uniform was his second skin. By 1910, he was a cadet, his posture rigid, his world defined by the manual. By 1912, he was a lieutenant. The transition was mechanical. The boy became a bolt in the Bavarian war machine. He did not choose his path, he was engineered for it. This absolute faith in the Army's greatness would lead him to Nuremberg 30 years later. But in 1914, the machine was finally switched on. World War I exploded. Jodl arrived at the front near Saarburg. The reality of combat was a sensory shock. He saw men torn apart. He felt the impact of shrapnel when he was wounded. He watched the hierarchy he worshipped struggle against the chaos of the trenches. He emerged from the Great War harder. His belief in the Prussian ideal remained untouched by the slaughter. He left the battlefield with a promotion and a lethal certainty in German restoration. Jodl packed his bags and moved toward the staff offices of the new Reich. Staff offices of the new Reich became his world. But the rigid lines of the high command didn't stop at the door of his home. While Jodl mapped out the destruction of nations, his private life was eroding. He married Irma in September 1913. She was a countess, high aristocracy, refined, elegant, and deeply connected to the old German world that Jodl swore to restore. Their marriage lasted 31 years. The front line stretched from the heat of North Africa to the ice of Norway. Jodl sat at the center of the machine. He moved divisions like chess pieces. Maps covered the tables. Telephones never stopped ringing. By 1944, the map showed a collapsing empire. On April 18th, the Wehrmacht was losing the Crimea. Thousands of soldiers were retreating or dying in the mud. That same day, Irma died in a hospital bed. Jodl did not leave his post. The Countess was a relic of the world he was busy burning down. He buried his wife while planning the final desperate campaigns of a dying regime. Berlin is burning. The Allies are closing the circle, and the Third Reich has days to live. In this chaos, the chief of operations stops to sign a marriage contract. 1 year after his first wife's funeral, as the Reich's borders collapse, Jodl's staff work merges with his private life. On April 7, 1945, he marries Louisa von Benda. She was his secretary at the Army High Command. She was also the close friend of his deceased wife. The bunker is filled with gray concrete dust. Outside, the city is a graveyard of steel and brick. Inside, Louisa wears a white wedding dress. It is a flash of ivory against the uniform gray of a dying regime. The ceremony is a desperate act of systemic madness. Jodl returns to his maps. Louisa joins his defense. She will spend decades in courtrooms and archives. She will challenge every document and every witness at Nuremberg. She will fight to prove he was a soldier, not a murderer, until her own death in January 1998. The marriage lasted exactly 192 days. The same fingers that slid a ring onto Louisa's hand had, 3 years earlier, signed the death warrants of hundreds. In 1939, Alfred Jodl became chief of the operations staff at OKW. He was the brain of the Wehrmacht. Every invasion plan for Poland, Norway, and France passed across his desk. He sat in Hitler's daily briefings while cities burned. He was not a distant clerk, he was the architect. In 1942, the paperwork turned lethal. Hitler demanded the commando order. Jodl did not hesitate. He took the draft, leaned over his desk, and pressed his pen to the page. The typewriter keys struck the paper like hammers. Allied special forces must be killed. Even if they surrender, click. Even if they are unarmed. Jodl knew the Geneva Convention of 1929 by heart. It strictly forbade the execution of prisoners. He signed anyway. The document left his office and entered the teletype machines. Ribbons of paper spat out the command across occupied Europe. The process was mechanical. A German patrol cornered a group of commandos in a Norwegian forest. The soldiers raised their hands. They showed their IDs. The sergeant checked the radio. The order from OKW was absolute. Execute them on the spot. In the back of a truck in Italy, the engine idled. In a barn in France, the smell of dry hay mixed with gun oil. Captives were lined up against wooden walls. No trial, no prisoner of war status. Just the sudden, sharp crack of Mausers. Jodl's signature translated into blood in the dirt of 100 fields. The commando order was a prelude, a warm-up for the industrial death machine on the Eastern Front. Jodl's signature no longer targeted individuals. It targeted entire populations. The scale shifted from bullet to famine. Jodl processed orders for mass reprisals against civilians. Soldiers burned villages to the ground. They slaughtered everyone inside. The excuse was partisan resistance. The reality was liquidation. The numbers defy comprehension. 5,700,000 Soviet prisoners entered German camps. Over 3 million never walked out. They died of deliberate starvation. They froze in open fields. Jodl viewed these humans as expendable liabilities. The population of the villages he ordered destroyed exceeded the population of his native Würzburg. Jodl remained calm. He maintained the cold posture of a professional. He claimed he was a soldier doing a duty. Nothing more, nothing less. The world disagreed. On November 20th, 1945, the International Military Tribunal opened in Nuremberg. The trial was a bureaucratic machine of sorting responsibility. 21 defendants sat in the dock. These men were the entire high-echelon elite remaining alive after May 1945. How to judge a general who never fired a single shot? The prosecution's formula contained 4 specific counts. The indictment was a legal grid: conspiracy, crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity. 4 points of law against millions of dead. The numbers did not balance. Alfred Jodl, the man who once drew front lines on Wehrmacht maps, now became a coordinate in an Allied legal scheme. His defense rested on a single pillar: the chain of command. Lawyers argued that the Nazi military structure made obedience a physical law. Orders from the supreme commander were not suggestions. Jodl maintained the stance of a professional clerk of war. His defense team prepared to argue that a soldier's only sin is losing, not obeying. They waited for the tribunal to recognize the sanctity of the uniform. Defense counsel officially entered a plea of not guilty. Alfred Jodl's wife, Louisa, found a crack in the Allied machinery. She identified a procedural error. According to biographer Gitta Sereni, the prosecution used documents that the defense never saw. Legal irregularities usually stall a trial. Louisa Jodl claimed the defense was blindfolded. Thousands of pages sat on the prosecution's table. They remained out of reach for Jodl's lawyers. Is a general responsible for the ink on a page? The chief of the operations staff was no low-ranking soldier. He was the architect. A man of his rank and intelligence sat next to the commander-in-chief. He did not just receive orders, he drafted them. The procedural breach was real, but the signatures were more tangible. The tribunal dismantled the just following orders defense with a single principle. International law demanded a choice. A soldier must disobey an unlawful command. Jodl held the pen. The evidence appeared in physical stacks. Large ink signatures marked the bottom of every page. The commando order, reprisal directives, operational plans for wars of aggression. Jodl signed the order to execute captured Allied commandos. A signature on a plan for aggression against the Soviet Union transformed into a death warrant. On October 1, 1946, the Nuremberg Tribunal ended 10 months of silence. The verdict for Alfred Jodl was a rhythmic strike. Guilty on count 1. The sentence was death by hanging. 2 weeks later, on October 15th, the bureaucracy of the cell replaced the bureaucracy of the staff. Jodl spent his final hours writing. He wrote to his wife, Louise. He wrote to friends. He wrote for history. He claimed he served Germany with honor. He called the judgment political. He refused to see the crimes, focusing only on the military regulations he had followed so precisely. Then came the inventory of the final hours. The condemned men sat before metal bowls. The menu was a mundane list of German staples: sausages, cold cuts, black bread, tea. The sensory reality was a cold potato salad in a heavy iron dish. It was a grotesque contrast. The man who orchestrated continental slaughter was finishing a simple snack. Shortly after midnight, the guards entered the corridor. The verdict from the courtroom transitioned into a logistics operation inside the prison gymnasium. At 1:30 in the morning, the transition from legal theory to physical execution began. The gymnasium was no longer for exercise. 3 black wooden gallows stood on the floor. Master Sergeant John C. Woods waited by the ropes. His assistant, Joseph Malta, checked the timers. Execution was now a conveyor belt. Ribbentrop went first, then Keitel, then Kaltenbrunner. One by one, the leadership of the Third Reich entered the room. They heard the same sound, the heavy creak of wooden steps under the weight of the condemned. 13 steps. Alfred Jodl climbed them without assistance. No shaking, no hesitation. He reached the platform and looked at the witnesses. "My greetings to you, my eternal Germany," he said. The protocol remained rigid. The black hood went over his eyes. The hemp rope tightened around his neck. Woods signaled his assistant. The trap door swung open. The calculations of Sergeant Woods collided with the cold physics of the human body. Why did a standardized military procedure descend into a bloody executioner's failure? The answer lay in a forged resume and a fatal disregard for the drop table. John C. Woods had lied about his experience. On October 16, 1946, those lies became a mechanical catastrophe. The United States Army's field manual for executions required a precise ratio between the prisoner's weight and the length of the rope. Woods ignored the math. He built the trap doors too narrow. He cut the ropes too short. The wooden frame of the hatch waited below like a blade. When the bolt pulled back, the condemned didn't just drop. They swung. Joachim von Ribbentrop went through the hatch at 1:30 a.m. He did not die from a broken neck. The rope was too short to snap the vertebrae. Instead, the knot tightened around his throat. He struggled for 18 minutes. Wilhelm Keitel followed. The narrow opening caught his head as he fell. His face smashed into the heavy timber frame. 24 minutes of agony for Keitel. His nose was crushed. Blood coated the edge of the trap door. The witnesses in the Nuremberg gymnasium stood in a vacuum of silence, listening to the heavy, rhythmic thumping of boots against the wooden interior of the gallows. It was the sound of a man strangling in the dark. The mechanics of the long drop were designed for instant unconsciousness. Woods delivered slow-motion torture. Alfred Jodl stepped onto the platform at 2:34 a.m. His body hit the end of the rope, but the neck remained intact. The official record confirms the failure of the machine. He was pronounced dead at 2:50 a.m. 16 minutes. The official statement was ready before the bodies grew cold. Death was instantaneous. The executions were professional. This was the narrative the U.S. States Army fed to the press while the gym floor in Nuremberg was still wet. Witnesses saw a different reality. They saw the convulsing limbs. They saw the clock. Lieutenant Stanley Tillis stood feet away from the gallows. He didn't watch the ropes. He watched the face of the executioner, John C. Woods. The sergeant's jaw remained clenched. His expression shifted into something Tillis found deeply unsettling. It wasn't the face of a man performing a clinical procedure. It was the face of a man presiding over a chaotic, suffocating struggle. While the press office polished its lies, the logistics of erasure began. The Army loaded the 11 crates onto trucks. The destination was a crematorium in Munich. This was no random choice. Munich was the capital of the movement. The city where the party was born would now consume its leaders. The ovens ran through the night. By morning, the men who commanded millions were reduced to gray dust. Soldiers drove the containers to a small bridge. They didn't look for a cemetery. They looked for the river Isar. Alfred Jodl was 56 years old when his ashes hit the water. There is no grave. There is no marker. The current carried the remains away in total silence. 1953. 7 years after the ashes of Alfred Jodl drifted down the Isar River, a courtroom in Munich reopened his file. The Cold War had begun. Western Germany needed a new army, and a new army needed a clean history. The Munich Denazification Court issued a sensational ruling. They overturned the Nuremberg conviction, posthumously. According to the German judges, Jodl had merely followed military law. They argued he was innocent of war crimes. Why did this happen in 1953? The reason was political, not legal. The burgeoning Bundeswehr required professional cadres. Rehabilitating a chief of staff served as a convenient bridge to the past. A clerk pulled a thick folder from a dust-covered shelf. The stamp of the Munich court hit the paper. One signature attempted to erase the verdict of the world. But international law does not work like a local German court. The Allied governments responded with fury. They refused to recognize the acquittal. To the Nuremberg tribunal, the Munich ruling was a phantom. The documents remain. They do not bend to political shifts. In the archives, the commando order still bears Jodl's handwriting. One signature, a single stroke of the pen. It meant the immediate execution of Allied prisoners of war, even those in uniform. Thousands of soldiers were shot after surrendering. Their names fill the military records. No legal maneuver from 1953 can remove his signature from the criminal orders. The Munich court verdict of 1953 remains a footnote. Paper cannot overwrite the ink on the commando order. Alfred Jodl spent years optimizing the mechanics of invasion. He calculated fuel, ammunition, and human lives. In 1941, he signed the documents that authorized execution without trial. His intellect served the logistics of annihilation. The transition from the war room to the cell was absolute. In Nuremberg, the efficient manager faced a different kind of mechanics. The drop was poorly calculated. The rope did not snap his neck instantly. Jodl hung in the gymnasium for 18 minutes. A dull thud echoed in the room as his body finally went still. The professional soldier ended as a physical statistic. No legal rehabilitation can erase the signature of 1941. History remains indifferent to the excuses of subordinates. The record is closed.